this. Yeah, one of these days I hope to be a bit more comfortable on camera. I don't particularly like this, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think that it needs to be done, and I don't see that anybody else is really spending a lot of time doing, at least not this kind of stuff that I'm attempting here. I'm attempting to try and explain a few things about what it is that you're seeing going forward. Right. I mean, we can look back to the past, but we also got to see like what's going to go forward and how things are going to be a little different this time around as opposed to, what's happened in the past. Well, we have a number of different factors, and so. But today, before getting too far off into just some general rant, I actually want to focus a little bit on an interesting topic, and that is, does poverty cause crime? Okay, well, we have two words that we have to first define, so I'm going to go ahead and underline these real quick. The first one is poverty, the next one is crime. It's important that we define these words because, as I've said before in this program, whatever you want to call this grouping of sessions, if you don't define your terms, somebody else will define them for you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all, I'm going to go take the time to define these two words because I don't know that anybody else is really defining them. We hear buzzwords all the time, right? We hear communism, we hear capitalism, we hear socialism, we hear all these different words, and nobody really ever bothers to define them. But if you took the time to define these words, in a lot of cases, what ended up happening is that you'd find out that most people don't really know how to define any of these words. It's why I've pointed out it's important to watch actions, not watch how something operates. Don't try and give it a name yet. Give something a name after you're comfortable with it, but then also just keep in mind that, remember, the names are going to change over time. And there's a reason why, like, you ever been to a lawyer's office? And you'll see all those books, all those volumes upon volumes upon volumes of books. Those exist predominantly because the language, every time someone goes into a courtroom, they start changing the language over and over and over. And like, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? And it creates something called precedent. And when that happens, all of a sudden you can, it's sort of like look up asset and liability in the dictionary, right? I mean, you've all heard probably Kiyosaki talk about this. Look up those definitions, and then you're going to be like these don't make any sense at all. Yeah, it's because that's what the reason that is because people start playing with definitions, and when you start changing a bunch of definitions around, you get a lot of confusion, and it's by design, right? That's not done because it's not done because on accident. It's done deliberately. People will change it. They massage it. Remember, nobody wants a free market. I've said this for a long time, except for those of us who want free markets, which is rare. What people want is a market that works for them. They want it to work for them. They want to sit on the beach, earn 20%. They don't want to actually have to do anything, right? Remember, it's like there's this weird thing that goes on, and we talked about this before, but there's this weird thing that people do. Right? They'll scream and yell that you're lazy and you're not working hard enough and it's all your fault. They'll do that and then haul off and be lazy themselves. Right? Like this is just a weird part of the human condition. When you pay attention to this for a while, like I have, and I've been doing this a long time. I pretty much shut out adults when I started growing up. About age 10, 11. I kind of gave up on learning any kind of truth from other people because I just stopped trusting them. Remember how I said that you're born into this world, you come into this world in the middle of a movie, and what happens is you're relying on other people to explain to you what's going on in the movie so that you understand where you fit in everything. But if the people that you're born to, the house that you're born to, if they don't know what the hell is going on, well then you're kind of screwed. Or if they're just malevolent, maybe they don't like you. That was certainly the case for me. Not to go too far into my pedigree, but I wasn't exactly liked by, really, frankly, either side of my family for a lot of different reasons. But not least of which is that, my father was a carnival worker, right? He ran the tilt-a-whirl at a carnival. And my mother was, considered not to be very bright. And so the two of them got together for the most horrible of reasons, which was to escape two horrible families, and decided, got into a relationship and had me and so forth. And of course, both sides of the families really didn't want that. So therefore, it left me kind of on my own to discover the world for myself. And I've actually done a fairly decent job of it, if I do say so, in that being born to poverty, like myself, growing up on the south side of town, in the projects, about as poor as you can grow up in the West. That's kind of it. And then on top of that, to be compounded by going to the schools and into the school system, and then finding that everybody there is a big bunch of fucking hypocrites, it tends to make you go, okay, well, clearly none of you people really have any of my best interests in mind. You probably don't have anybody else's best interest in mind. What you want is somebody else to do something for you. And make no mistake, that is what you all face. All of you, whoever you are, that is what you face. The average person is out for themselves. They're not out for you or humanity or any of that other stuff. I mean, it would be great if they were, and there are a few people that are like that. But those are the people that actually care about their community and their culture and so on, right? A lot of people don't do that any longer. I mean, right now they're spending all their time trying to survive, which is going to segue nicely, a little preamble, into what I'm going to talk about, which is, does poverty cause crime? The short answer is yes and no. For the philosophers out there, I am not a philosopher. Fortunately, I'm not bound by the ideas of morality, false gods, things like that. I'm not bound by that. As someone who looks at the world, the physics of the world, right? You understand? I look at the physics. I look at the reality. I look at what's going on in front of me, right? Like on Earth, in this 5 sense reality, whatever it is, I have to deal with what is. Okay, and in the physics part of it, and in the physics part of that, well, that means that I have to. I don't get to look at. I don't have to deal with the philosophical side of it. I mean, I can, but it's not really my bailiwick. This is more, So I'm going to explain to the philosophers out there. I know there's a whole bunch of you out there, the internet philosophers, that'll say, no, poverty does not cause crime. You're half right. You're half right, and I'm going to try and explain this as best I can. So bear with me. There are two kinds of poverty, and I'm going to write these down. Okay, synthetic. I see. I knew there was an I in there. Synthetic, and then there's organic. All right, what are the two definitions? I'm going to define organic first. So from bottom to top, organic poverty is you being born into poverty. You being born into a poor house. You being broke. You doing something like something internal. In other words, something where you've decided. Maybe you decided that you want to write a book. Maybe you decided that you want to go experience. You want to go backpack through Europe, right? I mean, growing up in the '90s, I heard about this all the time from I want to go backpack through Europe, and so you'd have people that would want to what they're going to do is they're going to basically choose poverty. Right, in so many words, and they're going to go out and do sort of the hippie thing. If you, I don't want to overuse that word, but do sort of that thing where it's a choice, right? Like that part's actually a choice, or you're born to it. Like so, in my case, right, I was born in poverty, no father. He took off when I was about 3. All that stuff, right? So that's organic poverty. It's something that either exists because of the circumstances that you're born into, or it's something that you do yourself, right? So let's say, for example, maybe you have a really good job, but then you decide that you want to have a cocaine habit, right? Well, cocaine habit's going to be kind of expensive, and so you start burning through all your cash to pay for your cocaine habit, or you have a gambling habit, or you have any one of a number of different vices that people get themselves into. Maybe you have one of those, and so therefore you've kind of created your own poverty. I put that still into the category of an organic poverty. It's something that you either have control of, or it's something that you are born into, and maybe you're physically disabled and you're unable to do a certain thing, or maybe you're mentally disabled, you're unable to do something about it, so therefore it fits into the category of more of something that is organic, for lack of a better explanation, but there you go. Synthetic poverty, that's the next one here. This bugaboo is the bigger problem, okay? What is synthetic poverty? Synthetic poverty would be an example of, let's say that you've done really well for yourself. You've got, you're doing well, you're making money, you got a nice car, the whole bit, and I show up and steal everything from you, right? And now you are impoverished, right? That is synthetic poverty. That isn't something that you chose to do, right? You're living your life, you're doing your thing, you're working and so on, and then somebody steals everything from you, so now you are impoverished. Okay, that's an example of synthetic poverty. You didn't choose that; somebody else made that choice for you. Somebody else did it to you, right? That's something that is external to you that happens. Now, here's where the problem comes in that I see with the so-called conservatives who don't seem to conserve anything, and the so-called liberals, and there's nothing liberal about them. The challenge comes in when they start screaming about privilege and all this other stuff. Okay, so, and that you're using people, or that you're creating the circumstances, like, right? Okay, we've all heard these types of arguments. I mean, I don't need to go into all of them. So you have the internet, you can look it up yourself. So you've seen all this stuff, and you see a lot of these college professors, as if any of these guys have any idea what the hell poverty is really like. I mean, I got to tell you. I'm just saying that, like, look, this is the kind of thing that ends up happening. This is where the argument comes back in. They go back and forth, like, oh, you're stealing, you're oppressing people, and it goes back and forth. Here's where you have to actually concede. This is where both sides need to actually understand something. Synthetic poverty does exist, and there is something about you taking and stealing money from people, right? And which is a form of oppression. I hate to use that word because it's so bastardized now. It's like a lot of other words where they get overused, and then they tend to lose meaning, or they tend to take on meanings that they didn't really actually have. Well, that's what ends up happening. So how are you being ripped off? How are you being stolen from? How are there so many people out there that are basically stuck in synthetic poverty? These people that work, right? They have jobs, they do things, they go places, and they don't go places, they go to work, right? They spend all their money on gas. They basically spend all of their existence trying to exist, right? And they never get really any further ahead. Now, what's causing that? Well, we've been discussing it this entire time, but it's right here. It's your inflation, your taxes, your interest rates, and your insurance premiums, which is just gambling. It's forced gambling. It's the government telling you you're required to gamble. This is where, remember, 70 to 90% of all of your energy is going to support all this crap. That actually is creating synthetic poverty. And it's getting worse. It's getting worse and worse and worse, and it's going to slowly start working its way up the pyramid. How that works? Haha! I don't have a eraser yet, but I do have a rag. So we've been over. So we're discussing poverty, but as it works its way up the pyramid, okay, it's going up. So more and more people in this system here are dropping away to synthetic poverty. It's just going right up the line, tick, 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 and that is going to continue. The system is designed like that, and it's because eventually you run out of everybody else's money. You've all heard what is it? I think I can't remember. Former Prime Minister of England, she had said something to the effect of, the problem with socialism is that sooner or later you run out of everybody else's money. That's kind of what's happening. It isn't just socialism or communism. Like, these things, they're a ripoff. The one thing that I've always said, and I've maintained this for a long time, that there's one thing, if you notice, that both communism and capitalism have in common. Look for the common theme. What do they have in common? central banks. Central banking, the idea that a group of people somewhere at the very tippy top of this whole little organization here is going to control the money. And not just the money supply, but the money value. I'm going to come back to the word value as we go here, because this is something that really needs to be understood. When you throw the word value is really critical. It's subjective, but it's one of these things that it applies to a lot of things. It doesn't just apply to your culture. It doesn't just apply to your money. It applies to almost everything in your life, right? Like, what do you value, right? Do you value your children? Do you value your life, your home, your basic way of life, right? We all have values that go along with that, and that's the important part to talk about. It's like when you're dating somebody, right? When the important part when dating somebody is to try and find out what their values are. Do they have any values, right? Or do they just sit there and go, man, I don't know. Well, if they don't know, you probably need to not date them anymore. I just, not to get all dad about this whole thing, but my son's in his 30s, but I mean, like, if I had young kids, right, or younger people, younger teenagers that were my children, and they started dating, I would be trying to tell them, like, hey, when you're dating somebody, why don't you take the time before you do anything serious and find out if you have anything in common with these people. Do they have the same kinds of values that we have as a family, right? I mean, it's just simple stuff. So that's the understanding of poverty. There's two kinds of poverty. There's also two kinds of crime. Okay, there's crime, which is an actual crime. Now, what is an actual crime? An actual crime has an actual victim. I don't know if we've ever covered this, but a crime has an actual victim, right? In that, not a theoretical victim, not a government or a state or some kind of entity claiming that somehow they've been victimized because you ran a red light, and so therefore give us money because you did something that we consider to be a crime. That's not actually a crime. That's complete bullshit. Remember, there's two things, and we've been over this before. See, this little tray doesn't really have a good pot to put any of this stuff, so we've been over this before, so I end up having to drop this on the ground. So we've been over this before. You, and then two things about you. The first is conscience. That's an E. And then physics. Okay? These are the two things about you that exist, that make up all things. They make up everything that there is. They make up who you are. They make up the physical world. That's the physics portion of this. Okay, this is the physical world. This is the internal world. This is what makes up who you are, right? Inside of your physical existence is you. Electrical, chemical, whatever you want to look at it, as stuff. I tend to see it as more electrical because it seems to be that the way that the universe operates in terms of frequency. But so these things, this is real. Everything a part of this, that if you're violating the laws of physics, what's the typical punishment for the laws? Violation of laws of physics, for the attempt at the violation of laws of physics. What's the typical? What is the typical punishment for that? It's usually death, right? Usually, it's what ends up happening. Conscience is something that happens to you, and it happens slowly. Remember, the slowest killer of human beings behind time is conscience. That's the second slowest killer of man. So, what's the violation here? Well, it's a violation of conscience. If it violates conscience, then that means that you actually probably created a victim, like an actual victim. Okay, so for crime, we're going to use the word crime, and then we're going to put crime in quotes. Okay, crime in quotes is when the government says that you're a criminal. In other words, when a bunch of criminals say you're a criminal, right? Then it becomes like, if a bunch of criminals, right, who are robbing people and murdering people and shooting dogs because that's what they do, are telling you you're a criminal, right? And they're hanging out with guys like Epstein, and they're doing all of these, and they're collecting, like, I've always found this weird. They're collecting everything from child porn to you name it, and it's okay for them to look at it, but not for you. Like, I'm not even saying that you should do that. I think that's a terrible idea. It's a horrible thought, but it's like, I'm sorry. How is it exactly that it's okay for everybody else, for these guys, but it's not okay for anybody else? This is where crime comes in. And if you hearken back to about, I don't know, 5 or 6 videos ago, I talked about pork, right? I talked about pork. And what did I explain about pork? I use that as an example, right? That's the example of taking religion and then saying, look, make this a sin, so that way these people will behave and do something that we want them to do. That's where you get into crime in quotes. It's a crime. It's a sin. Like, okay, but can I buy my way out of it? Can I pay a fine? Well, yes. Then it's not really a crime. In fact, it's not only it just means that I have to give you more money to do something that I would do anyway, right? So that's where that comes from. And that programming, by the way, that programming, just so you know, comes from your conscience. I wasn't really going to tear into this too much with this, but I need to explain this here. Your conscience can actually be hacked. Did you know that? Absolutely. That's how you get people to where they are now, right? Your conscience is hacked from when you're a kid. And it starts with slow training of teaching you something's wrong. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. And it's over and over and over. And it gets beat into you, and it turns into something like, oh my God, I've committed some kind of horrible crime or an atrocity or something. Like, oh, okay, yeah, that's because your conscience got hacked. The reality is something probably never. It probably wasn't a crime. It probably wasn't anything you did. Like you turned right out of a right turn only lane. With a median, and you didn't signal. Now, according to the state, that could be that's a crime. Pull over. We need money. We need money. This is an example of synthetic crime. It's invented crime. It's not an actual crime. You didn't actually. There's no actual victim. Right? Remember, we talked about way back. We talked about law, capital L law, like actual law, laws of the universe, law, God's laws, etc. We talked about that. Then we also talked about law, small l, law in quotes, which is like it's not really a law. It's an excuse for somebody to take advantage of you. These things are all tied together, and they create something called synthetic poverty, because they're inventing a bunch of laws. Like look at the prison systems, right? The way this prison system is operated, it's designed to get people in it and make money. That's what it's designed for. On its face. And you say, well, but there's violent people. Yeah, violent people are let out. But why do you think violent people are let out? You don't understand how insurance works. If you don't understand why they let violent people out, you don't understand how insurance works. So I'm going to explain to you briefly. I'll explain it to you. Violent people in prisons. Talk to any prison guard, and they're going to tell you a violent person in prison. Those are the guys who assault staff members. When you have an assault, let's say that you had a really violent, let's say that you incarcerated Hannibal fucking Lecter, right? The man himself in time. Okay, the theoretical character was Thomas Harris, I think. Anyway, so the Hannibal Lecter character, right? Who will assault anybody to get, he'll actually cut people's faces off and everything and wear them like a hood to get out of jail, right? You understand insurance companies don't want to insure that, right? Okay, put yourself in the insurance company's perspective, right? Put yourself in their position. Would you want to write the check to a family member who is suing for tens of millions of dollars because one of the guards had their face cut off and worn like a hood by somebody to escape prison? Would you want to write that check? No insurance company wants to cover that. So what happens is they find reasons to, there was an error, there was a glitch, so that person got let out. Now the one guys that they always hold in prison are the guys that are there for the non-violent stuff, drug offenses and shit like that. In other words, non-crimes, right? People who crime, okay, they're the ones who are going to let out the fastest, and we see that in the neighborhoods because you see that crime is going up, and actual crimes are going up, but nobody's doing anything about it. Well, yeah, because once again, same thing. What are police told? Leave them alone. Just hey, don't show up. The most important thing for you to do is go home at night, and it's not because they give a shit about the cop's life. Seriously, they don't give a fuck about that guy. You think they give a fuck about the cop? All you cops out there that may be watching this, you think they give a shit about you? They don't give a shit about you. What they care about is not having to write a fucking check to your family when you get a bullet in you. They don't want to write that check. They don't want to have to, or worse, you live. That's the worst one, is that you live through it and you're a paraplegic or you're a quad. And now they have to write checks forever to cover all of that. They don't want that. No, they would rather the homeowner get killed. Like, that's his problem, man. Whatever, man. It's not our problem. It's somebody else's problem. Like, when you start to understand how insurance companies work, let me see if I got my light. When you start to understand how this stuff works, you start to think like these people. That's the whole goal here. If you start to think, I'm trying to get you to stop thinking like a petty criminal and think like a high-end criminal, right? Once you start to think like that, this stuff makes a lot more sense. A lot of the world makes a lot more sense. A lot of the world makes way more sense when you start thinking about it. They don't want to write a check for that stuff. They don't want to pay for any of that. That's where this comes from. So the guys that are there for actual crimes, like, they get kind of lit out, pretty fast. They don't want those guys there. The guys that are there that are like, they're kind of violent, like they're the guys who do like DV, things like that. They like beat up on chicks and everything. Like, the guards don't care about those guys, right? And they're probably not going to assault anybody there. But if you've got the people that are like the hardcore guys, right? I mean, like, those are the guys that are problematic. And and of course the question is, why are they problematic? That's a topic for another time. But I mean, just topic for another time. But one of the reasons you start to ask, like, why would they be that violent? Because at a certain point, you have to kind of ask yourself, like, well, if somebody's that violent, are they justified in their violence, or is it true psychopathy? I don't think that there's that many actual true psychopaths. I think that there are people that are justified in their minds. Somewhere along here, this got kind of messed up. Somewhere between here and here, this got all kind of turned haywire. That's an opinion, by the way. So anyway, does poverty cause crime? Well, think of it this way. If you've been put in poverty synthetically, right? Someone's stolen a bunch of your shit, and then you go and steal it back, right? If you go do that, well, you're committing a crime, right? On paper, you're committing a crime, statistically. But are you actually committing a crime? No, you're not. But that's how it's seen, though. It's how it's seen. Like, and this is stuff to kind of think about. And by the way, remember, this isn't even a philosophy. I'm not a philosopher. I assure you I'm not a philosopher. I promise you on this. I'm looking at things for what they are, right? And I see the way that the behaviors, I'm observing the behavior. That's all I'm doing. I'm observing behavior. This is observe and report. That's all this is. I'm telling you what I'm seeing is that people are, like, if you're creating synthetic poverty, if you put someone in synthetic poverty by ripping them off through inflation, by the way, inflation's the biggest one. That's the big guy. Right? You keep ripping them off, eventually they do exactly what the Soviets did. Near the end of the Soviet Union, we all know this. I mean, you can look this up. It's well documented. Near the end of the Soviet system, what ended up happening? People basically stole anything not bolted down. Anything they could get their hands on, anything that was of perceived value, people would steal it. And it started at the top, and eventually it worked its way down, right? This is the one where it went the other way around. Okay, you had your people at the top, your state officials. They're the ones who started looting everything as quickly as possible. Any money they could get out of the country, they did. So this happened in World War II. It happens every single time a civilization collapses. You're seeing it right now in the United States. You're seeing it right here in this country. You're watching every politician make fortunes upon fortunes right now. Look at them. It's being reported all over the place. If you go to Twitter, right, because you can't find this on the regular news. Go to Twitter and you're going to find all these people reporting on how much money Pelosi and all these other famous politicians they're making fortunes right now. Well, yeah, it's because they're just looting the treasury. That's all they're doing. It's the last act of a dying civilization. They just loot the treasury. This has happened in Rome too. So. But it starts working its way down to the point where, when it gets down there, it starts filtering into the people looting Walmart. Well, but that's private property. Who owns it? For real, who owns it? Who at a Walmart actually owns any part of Walmart? Almost nobody, right? You end up with sort of a Soviet system with brand names. That's kind of where you're at right now. This is a real problem, and it's something that you're going to have to, that both sides are going to have to realize this. But the biggest challenge are going to be people on the right, unfortunately, because they still believe in this mom and apple pie thing, and the benevolent rich guy is going to come in and save them, and it's just not going to happen. So we'll see you next time.